Standing on that ledge, you think you're gonna fly. If you take that long last step, we'll have to say goodbye. Whoa, whoa.
Hello and welcome back to Beating a Dead Horse. As always, I'm Sean McKinda.
And I'm Jackson Keller. You sound pretty downtrodden. Are you all right?
Well, I mean, yeah, like, we keep trying to do Life After Death, and Derek just keeps telling us no. Like, we release just genuine quality content that is entirely serious, entirely just... We worked really hard on that episode, and I'm just... Derek is making me upset.
Fucking Derek. How dare you? How dare we work under a fat cat like him?
I know. Fucking Big Pharma all over the place.
You know, here's Derek just sitting around with his deep state connections and Big Pharma, and here we are trying to put out artistic content, but the man keeps us down.
The man keeps us down. The man keeps us down indeed. So I guess instead of talking about the wonderful life of Vince Vaughn and everything he's done for us, we're going to talk about some shitty thing called Mob Psycho 100. Mob Psycho 102 to be exact, but we'll probably be talking a lot about Mob Psycho 100 as well. It's a really fucking good anime.
One of my favorites, I dare say. Top 5 anime, definitely. No doubt. 100%. The show is fucking great.
Yeah, so just a little bit of context. I watched this on recommendation from Jackson following seeing One Punch Man, as so many people have, and Jackson's like, hey, you should check out the guy who made One Punch Man 1's other show, Mob Psycho 100. So I sat down and I went through it, and I'm like, I kind of get it. I'm not really necessarily vibing with it. And then about halfway through, it just clicked, and I'm like, oh, no, I understand this show now. This show is fucking wonderful. And then it ended, and I'm like, oh, well, that was cool. I texted Jackson, I'm like, hey, you think they're ever going to make more? He's like, no, probably not, because it felt like a one-off. Obviously, One Punch Man's the bigger show. It's doing more numbers. And then they did it. They brought back more, and it's even better than the first season, and I'm so happy. It was great.
So Mob Psycho 100, I had recommended it to a lot of people, despite being somewhat frustrated with the first season, and I'm going to talk about why in much greater depth later. But needless to say that any misgivings I've had about it have completely gone away, especially on the rewatch, because I had been looking for more anime to force my girlfriend to watch. Girlfriend-friendly anime, if you will.
It's not horny, we have to say. Like, you can watch this with your family. It's not a horny anime, which is always a requirement for me.
So, I mean, we were in the middle of JoJo Stardust Crusaders, actually, when we got to the pedo ape, and she said, no more. Like, I'm absolutely done with this.
Like a reasonable human being.
You know, she had enjoyed Battle Tendency. You know, we memed about the Pillar Men and continued to do so, but part 3 was too much. And I'm like, you know what? That's fair. What should we do? Oh, we really enjoyed One Punch Man, so maybe she'll like Mob. And so I started watching Mob again, and a lot of my misgivings about the first season were just like less. I had much less of a problem with now that I could kind of see the bigger picture. And also it was a real treat because we rewatched it, and then as soon as we got to the end, season 2 had been running for a couple weeks at that point. So we just kept on plowing on through, and season 2, even fucking better. The character development is just completely unreal. It's such a unique show visually. It's such a unique show in terms of like battle shonen, in terms of content, in terms of theme. It's not. The thing about One's writing is that somehow, like, he manages to play around with all these tropes, both in this and One Punch Man, of like battle shonen, which One Punch Man does a lot more obviously. But strangely enough, I think that Mob Psycho 100 really gets to what the core appeal of battle shonen is, and it does it masterfully, and it's about growth and the way that both these shows manifest it, but again, especially this one, especially Mob, since One Punch Man's so much more of an explicit comedy. Like, there are a lot of gags, but I'd say, generally speaking, the show takes itself more seriously, especially in the second season. But the growth of the main character, just unreal. Like, he's barely recognizable from how he was when we started off. The side characters, all really charming and wonderful and have a surprising amount of depth and interiority, and that's another thing that I love about season 2, is that even kind of one-off characters who you think that there isn't much to them, like the girl that Mob has a crush on, like, start to get fleshed out a little bit more, and you can tell that that's only going to keep going as the manga goes forward, like the Body Improvement Club guys. Just absolutely bros. The best kind of bros. Yeah, I mean, and it's all so great. And the relationship between Mob and Reigen is so interesting and unique, and Reigen's such a fun character. Fucking love it. It's fucking great.
Yeah, it's a wonderful show full of wonderful characters just doing wonderful things, and like the gags are all genuinely enjoyable. Nothing really feels dirty, like in the way that some animes do, like looking at JoJo's Pedo episode, or like the gratuitous beach episodes and stuff like that. Like, nothing ever feels sketchy to watch. Like, I'm struggling to think of anything, so like I might get flack for this later, but like for the most part, like, it seriously just feels like a good, clean show, and I'm really into it. And like, even going beyond characters and stuff like that, I kind of want to more talk about what season 2 has kind of meant for me. And like, I'm not going to get into spoilers at all right now. I just want to more preface everything that we're about to talk about, because the show has kind of hit me at a time where I've been struggling with some of my own pathing. But like the theme song and everything like that, it culminates in this whole thing where it ends with "Your life is your own," and it's basically the theme for the show, the series, the whole thing. And I have taken just those words from the end of it and made it like my background on almost everything I have. Because it's just like the whole show is basically saying like, hey, everything that happens, you can choose what to do with it. And so like when I'm feeling trapped in things that I've committed to and whatnot, and like I'm not going to get too into the specifics of it just for personal reasons and whatnot. It's felt wonderful to be like, hey, you know what? Fuck. My life is my own. I can come back at this and do what I want with it. And so, sure, right now it's kind of shitty, but hey, I'm working through it. My life is my own. I'm gonna do something different with it. Just you wait. And it's great. It's really heartwarming in that way.
Yeah, I this show's hit me in a particular spot as well. Along Sean's sentiments, another quote that I like from the show that's kind of reoccurring, in that without explicitly spoiling anything, the season kind of ends on, is at one point Reigen says to Mob that you're the main character of your own life story. And I feel like a lot of the show is dedicated to just exploring what that means and how that plays off how the villains interpret that kind of sentiment versus how you can, still be like a moral person with that sort of sentiment. Because I think that what I appreciate about the show the most is that it's at once idealistic but also pragmatic. Like there's something very down to earth about the way that the main character sort of views his relationships and the way so that people can change and like be better. And I think a lot of times, especially in a lot of anime, like this can feel sort of preachy and hollow, but I think what makes the difference here is that there is acknowledgments of some of the issues that maybe I take with other anime, and that like one.
Even before you dive into that, I think like the big thing here is that it revels in that idea. It doesn't just like throw it out there and run away from it. It's more like this is everything. This is what we're saying. It's explored with everyone, main characters, side characters, villains, everyone. It's great.
Yeah, and it's such a good question because anime as a medium tends to fall on like one side or the other of, I mean, particularly kind of the the power of the collective and, contributing to a greater cause and, power of friendship and all that stuff. And that's, of course, a reflection of a lot of the more communal values that Japan has compared to how individualistic the West is. But I think the key here is that Mob explores that question of like how does the like this idea of developing bonds with other people and the power of friendship like fit into this very individualistic perspective of your life is your own, you're the protagonist of your own life story. And I mean I think that, like I said, sort of the difference here is that the show acknowledges to me like how hard it can be to like do the right thing, and how it can and it doesn't like really downplay sort of the difficulties of that. Like it makes explicit a couple times that Mob really only has the luxury of kind of being so nice and being so kind of forgiving with his enemies and stuff because he has like a certain amount of power over them. But at the same time, like that power is not what defines him, and is also, something that is just a part of him, that is a unique trait among other people's talents and traits and things that they can do that he cannot. And
yeah, I love that they kind of treat psychic abilities in the same way that you might be like, I can stand on one leg for a really long time. It's a really clever analogy that I really dig.
Yeah, and I really like it because I think especially what season 2 does is that the writing is just so deft in terms of how it handles that pragmatically speaking, because like my gut instinct when I hear that is like, well, that's all fine and dandy, but when you have like superpowers and stuff, like clearly bad things can happen, and you do have legitimate like power over people. But the show acknowledges that, and the show wrestles with that, and it shows like how other people's talents come into play to sort of all contribute, particularly with Reagan and his ability to be charismatic, to think on the fly, and use sleight of hand and all these other talents to be more effective than Mob, especially early on when Mob has less like social awareness and is just kind of like a beat stick with his power. And yeah, I mean the show, it's a super encouraging show in that so much of it is concerned with morals, but it never feels like preachy or like overly idealistic or unrealistic or anything like that. The fact that it manages to be so down to earth while also being so crazy, I mean that's what I want out of an anime. That's the good shit. That's what I'm here for.
Get that nice grounding going. But actually, I have kind of an interesting thought as you were talking about this, and I'm just kind of curious as to like if you think that this might have influenced what Mob Psycho 100 is, because Japan is a notably kind of collectivist culture, right?
Yes.
So, like, for an anime to be all about individuality feels very unique, especially when it's basically saying you're the protagonist of your own life. It's saying, like, you're not necessarily working for that collectivist goal as much as, like, we see that in America all the time because we are much more of an individualist culture where, like, you are the protagonist of your own life. You're special. You can do whatever you want. You can go be an astronaut type of thing. It's a very interesting thing to see something so individualist come from Japan, especially something that has become so successful.
So I think that This is definitely an interesting question, and I am by no means an expert on any of this. But if I had to say, I think that a lot of that theming, if I'm gonna psychoanalyze this man who I've never met and I don't even know his real name, I want to talk about One for a minute and just kind of the overall body of work that we've seen from him so far with One Punch Man and Mob Psycho. Is that the thing about One is because he got his start doing webcomics, writing manga, being a manga author in Japan is seen as a risky move in a way that it isn't in America. Like that sort of thing. In America, you'll of course have people sort of poo-pooing you if you want to go have a creative artistic career, but in Japan, it's seen as downright irresponsible a lot of the time. And that's if you're going to go like work for Weekly Shonen Jump and be serialized and still have like a stable career. But the thing about One is that he only got famous through doing One Punch Man as a webcomic and like quit his job and for a while quit his webcomic to go kind of be part of the salaryman, regular 9-to-5 sort of thing. And then he came back to it, and then he drew more manga, and I believe that Mob Psycho is actually printed in the manga version by, I don't know if it's a webcomic, I'm not positive about that. But I think that between these two works, they form an interesting duality in that One Punch Man, they both star characters who, in terms of like physical power and ability, are so far above and beyond everyone else in their universe. But in One Punch Man, it's more about how like isolating that can be and how like achieving your goals won't make you happy and you still need like social contact and like interactions with other people in order to sort of be a complete kind of human being. And Mob Psycho has those themes too, but it also is focused more on the individualism side of things, in that its approach is less like you're the protagonist of your own life story, so you should just do whatever you want, because that's the villain's approach to stuff in this universe. The approach is more like it's a big, beautiful world out there full of interesting people with their own unique talents, so you have to figure out what your talent is and how you can kind of live a good life, whatever that means for you, and find your place kind of in this big sort of collaborative, collective system. And I think that if I just had to guess, I'd say a lot of that individualism sort of comes from the fact that, not only is One a manga guy, but he's a manga guy who got famous through the internet. So I think that, again, to psychoanalyze this man that I've never met and don't even know his real name, I think that is probably like something of an interesting contrast to him, and that, he tried the 9-to-5 thing and it didn't work out. He was, he basically was Saitama at the beginning of One Punch Man, and now, he lives maybe a more like secluded lifestyle. He uses a pen name to kind of be famous, and yet he's done a lot of good, interesting work that people like. So I think that the approach to individualism, again, it is something that, of course, as an American who very much values like individualism, generally speaking, like very much resonates with. But I think that the way that Mob in particular reconciles it with, no man is an island, like, you're not good at everything, like you can't just do everything by yourself, you need friends, you fucking asshole. Yeah, I mean, there's just something very unique and very interesting, and speaks to what a strong voice One is when it comes to manga.
I think it's really interesting too, like just something that as you were talking at once again, like basically this episode is going to be you talking and me going, while you were talking, I was thinking about this, because like I think it's kind of interesting that he chose the name One actually in hindsight of everything that we've been talking about, because he manages to take the individualism and put it in both of his main mangas or animes or however you want to consume his work, and like that just became his identity, like. One Punch Man and Mob Psycho 100 are just absolutely, very, very different in a lot of ways, from themes to ideas to basically the whole thing. But like they both focus on the idea of individualism and like what happens when you are so ultimately powerful from very different angles, and like examining the abilities that we have innately, and so like to name himself One I think is really interesting, because it's kind of looking at the self, like everything he does is to look at the self, the one, and I think he's very clever. He's basically what this boils down to, is it's very, very clever, and I'm really into it. And like I'm looking at the same time, I'm looking at like a fucking still from Mob Psycho 100 and realizing that unlike a lot of manga artists, every character in the background is always very unique and weird looking, which kind of really plays into these ideas too. And it's all really fucking clever. All right, my mind is getting that brain blast as we're going on here. And we haven't even hit spoilers yet.
We haven't even hit spoilers. And so the thing about it is that I also, like, I think that's a good point, bringing up his pen name. And the other thing I wanted to mention, since we're mostly talking about the anime versions of Mob and One Punch Man, but the thing is that, like, if for those of you who don't know, I guess I'll just give a brief summary. One Punch Man, which is what made him famous, started off as a webcomic that he just kind of drew by himself. But the thing is that, like, One is not a good artist in the traditional sense. Like, everything is very crude. They look kind of like kids' doodles. And, the anime version of both of these shows look really good. Like, Mob stylistically looks more like One's kind of cruder style. But even then, they've prettied it up. Like, they've taken obvious influences from the original manga, but they've definitely played around with it, introduced some cooler visual effects to create something really unique looking. But particularly One Punch Man is, the version that most people are familiar with is the manga redrawn by like the most talented manga artist working today. And so, however, I think that one of the things that makes the show's themes resonate so much is that even though, like, One's art isn't, like, beautiful, there's still a lot going for it. Like, if you look at panels of One Punch Man and Mob Psycho, dude's got a real eye for composition. His character designs are really unique and strong. Like, if you think about some of the funniest moments from both of these shows, thinking about, like, in particular, I remember after I was watching One Punch Man with one of my friends, and that scene where Saitama like pokes his face through the dirt and like gives this creepy smile to this terrified mole person before he punches him. Like, that scene is hilarious. And so we were like, how much was that prettied up? And if you go and look at the panel from the original webcomic, like, it's very close. Like, he got it. He nailed it the first time. So I think that it speaks a lot to this idea that even in his own work, in his own art, that even if he's not some, like, all-encompassing, like, genius of beautiful artwork, there's still a lot going for it. He still has his own unique ideas, unique compositions, unique stories to bring to the table. And I think that makes the actual content of the shows resonate all that much more.
Yeah, I mean, we should probably talk about spoilers at some point here. We're like 20 some minutes in here, so I'm gonna put the kibosh on what we're currently talking about, I guess.
That's fair. I too would like to talk about spoilers
because there's a lot to talk about in Mob Psycho 102. like the fact that I have to say Mob Psycho 102 every time. So before we do dive into spoilers, a couple big things. Number one, if you didn't know, we just kicked off a Patreon. It's patreon.com/BADHcast. There's a bunch of, all the information's on the site there. Please, if you feel like supporting us, please do so. Any bit to support us is just absolutely appreciated. We love doing this. We love keeping it ad-free. And we want to just continue to produce more and more stuff. And so, like, supporting us on Patreon is a great way to enable us to do that. And there's some kind of cool kickback rewards for you guys if you do so. Additionally, next week, we are going to be talking about Shazam, which kind of is pretty related to what we're talking about right now, actually. I'm curious to see what type of parallels we can draw and go from there, I guess. I don't know. We're going to talk about Shazam because we want to watch Shazam. It looks like it's going to be a charming movie, and that's all I really want out of superhero movies now.
Hopefully it won't be the worst.
High praise. really starting out on a strong note here. So yeah, let's dive into spoilers with that then. So I'm gonna defer to Jackson. What do you want to talk about? This is anime is your wheelhouse.
Yeah. Well,
talk to me. Let's
Goose. Talk. I want to talk about. I do want to talk about the show's sense of morality in more detail, because I mentioned that I do have a gripe, and it is a pretty big gripe in both seasons, but I want to stay positive for the moment here, because like I said, I really love this show. So as far as like the show's sense of morality, I guess like in order I can just sort of go kind of linearly, because the way I see it, both seasons share a structure that I think is pretty effective, and you can kind of group each like set of 3 to 4 episodes into like a little mini arc. And so usually at the beginning of both these seasons, a lot of the episodes are centered around sort of individual adventures that Mob and Reagan sort of go on to exercise spirits and deal with oddities and urban legends and what have you, culminating in a big sort of showdown one way or another with Dimple in the first season and the... Oh god, I can't remember its name, but the big scary ghost that possesses
Ghost Boy.
Yeah, they a ghost possesses a girl and he turns out to be a big scary boy. So in both cases, I've complained, you know, if we're comparing this to other battle shonen, which I'm going to do a lot. Speaking of JoJo,
it's Jackson comparing things to anime is what he
and
does.
Here it's actually appropriate. It's actually worth doing. But speaking of JoJo, considering we brought it up already, so
Jackson, speaking of JoJo, what
an unheard of crazy thing! Me talking about JoJo? No.
I'm just gonna rag on like every word in the next sentence you say, because that's apparently on the path I'm on right now. I gotta contribute to this episode somehow, alright?
Roast me, daddy. So, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. I've complained... We both have complained, in fact, about the Monster of the Week formula in JoJo. And I've gotten flack in particular for my stance on JoJo, like part 4 and part 5.
From your stand on?
I'm ignoring you. So the thing about JoJo is that every episode is like an individual little adventure, but the point of the adventure is always the stand or the wacky musical reference or just the powers. So it's a very enjoyment of JoJo, at least until the later parts, is very surface level. There's not much going on in terms of narrative or theme or character development until later. The thing about Mob, though, is that you also could say in the early parts, it's got kind of a Monster of the Week feel. It's, you know, they go and they exercise spirits that don't really come into play later. But the difference is that each of these little individual adventures contributes to their character development. What a concept! Right. It actually impacts them. I mean, Sean, I'll throw you a bone here. Talk about that one episode.
Oh, yeah. It's probably one of my favorite episodes from the season, and if not, like, my favorite episode of the series. It's the third episode of Mob Psycho 102, where they have to go fight this family of ghosts, and it's, like, really kind of heart-wrenching, because it's mostly them just standing in one place as Mob wrestles with the guilt of killing ghosts and, like, getting rid of spirits and whatnot. And, you know, Reagan's like, no, you have to do this. Like, this is what we got paid to do. And, like, watching Mob struggle as he, you know, weighs, like, what is a life worth? Is this something that I can do? They're promising to be good. They're promising not to do anything. It's heart-wrenching. And Reagan's eventually like, look, we don't actually need to do this. I can just, you know, fake it like I always do. And it's wonderful. It's such a great heartfelt moment that, like, really kind of informs a lot of the rest of the season, because it's a lot of him wrestling with what's good, what's bad, where do I stand in the world, and this is a great introduction to it. And it hits in the heart. It hits in the heart.
And the thing about this episode is that, like, with these individual adventures, each one kind of gets more intense until Mob reaches his breaking point. Like, that's kind of the central gimmick, is that you have his, like, repressed emotions and his stress meter that goes up in percentage, the 99 of the title, as he gets closer to unleashing, like, his full power and all of his emotions. And so, like, an event like this clearly shakes him up, especially considering everything else he's kind of gone through in the series until this point. And so it really comes to a head in the next episode, or the next arc, I guess, where he has to kind of dive into this girl's mind to exercise this big bad spirit. And for the first time, it seems like there may be a spirit that, in terms of sheer power, he just can't overwhelm. But the thing that makes these episodes super cool is that when he dives into the girl's mind and, like, goes to do the exorcism, he ends up living like a parallel life trapped in this girl's mind, where he doesn't have his connections, and he's just like a normal kid, like, getting the shit kicked out of him. And, you know, the ghost is trying to prove a point, because he too was an Esper when he was alive, and that, like, hey, everyone's a piece of trash. You know, they're only nice to you because you can lord your powers over them and you can do something for them. If it weren't that way, like, all these shitters would hate you and it would suck. So fuck it. Be a god emperor, basically. Like, I'm gonna try and egg you on to go Super Saiyan and just, like, turn your back on all the bugs beneath you. And I think that I really like this episode just because it's the breaking point moment. Like, this is a huge, like, turning point for his character, where, like, he's finally willing to fight back. And I think that this is really telling for me, because the show's kind of about pacifism at its core, and it's that's not uncommon for Battle Shonen.
The irony.
Yeah, right. This is what Gohan's arc in DBZ is about. Like, there's a couple other shows that I could think of, but this idea that, like, I am super powerful and have the power to stop things, but that would require me to take action and, like, eliminate another person. And what I like about both DBZ and this show, frankly, but, you know, this show, of course, has more depth to it, is that, like, throughout the first season, we get Mob, you know, really struggling with ever using his powers to hurt people, even if they're really bad, and, like, he's the only one that can do anything about it. And every time he explodes, it's like a big emotional traumatic thing for him. One of my favorite episodes in the first season was when he kind of served Teruki a slice of humble pie by, like, lifting the school into the air and, like, you know, completely owning him. But that wasn't a victory for Mob, because he wasn't able to talk him down. And so In this episode, though, where he like kind of goes into the the brain world of this girl and has to fight this big demon, you get a spectacular action sequence, like just as far as being a viscerally entertaining battle shonen. It's one of the most viscerally entertaining battle shonen that
so
I've seen.
stylish. It's wonderful. Like, if you don't trust us, just watch the opening cinematics from 1 and 2. They're both so good.
Yeah, and so like, and it feels really appropriate here with Mob kind of going all out and like finally letting go, because another great moment that sort of twisted expectations was at the end of the first season when Reagan confronted the Claw Gang in place of Mob and like really stressed like, no, Mob, like you can't like fight these guys, like they're pathetic, like you're just a kid, like you should leave it to the adults, like trust in me, I'll figure it out. And it's a really great kind of heartwarming scene when like Mob sort of subconsciously transfers his power to Reagan, and Reagan like totally owns them. And in this season they like hail him as a like genius philosopher who they want to like study under too. Which that gets into its own sort of baggage when we talk more about Reagan. But I think that what I'd say what season 2 does so well is that it takes maybe some of those loose ends from season 1 and isn't afraid to like confront them and build upon them. So like with Reagan like taking over for Mob there, that was a great like powerful moment in the first season, but it still has that open-ended question of like, well, okay, but that's not always going to be an option. Like sometimes there are problems that Mob can only solve because he does have this power. Like he's not always able to run away. And like when we're finally put in that position, like watching Mob grow as a person and say like, yes, like it's okay for me to fight. Like
you have to be
as
hard
long
on people
as
sometimes.
Yeah, you have to be hard on people sometimes. And it's always better to talk them down, but like I gotta prioritize like innocent people not getting hurt first.
Before you keep talking, I just have to say, at one point somebody said something like they evacuated all the innocent people already, and I'm like, oh, so it's just Avengers 1 again, huh?
I will say, I'll get into this later. So yeah, but like Mob really comes into his own. Like if we're talking about the DBZ comparison, this is Mob's Super Saiyan 2 moment where like he can't turn away any longer. But just like in DBZ, like the point of DBZ wasn't that Gohan should be a crazed murder monster and lose his shit and kill anyone who's evil. The point was that Gohan loses his shit and makes things worse because he's lost like his humanity, his rationality. And that's sort of the central struggle that Mob gets into at the end of the season here when he is confronting the big bad boss man of the Claw Gang. But before I talk about that a little bit more, I want to talk about just kind of the rest of the arc of the season. So, we're talking about the overall arc of both seasons. Individual adventures leads to a breaking point that marks a shift in Mob's character and perspective. The next part of the show, we tend to take a little bit of a detour from Mob, and focus on a character who's important or close to him in one way or another. And in the first season, it was Ritsu, and in the second season, it's Reagan, as Mob, after having sort of learned to stick up for himself in the previous battles, finally tells Reagan, like, hey, my friends are important to me. Like, I'm young, and I'm kind of starting to see how you're sort of using me. So, like, please stop, or I'm not going to work for you anymore. And they part ways. And so, while I will say that, like, in terms of the first season, upon the rewatch, I think that Ritsu's arc works a little better. But I remember being disappointed, from the way that character ended up playing out, because he's presented as such like a sweet brother, and I was a little disappointed they went with the inferiority complex route. I think that they pulled it off pretty well, especially once my own like expectations of what I wanted out of the show were set aside, and I like that their continued treatment of that character in this season. So like it's a decent enough arc in the first season, but here, like my favorite part of the show of the second season is where we really get into the nitty-gritty with this relationship between Mob and Reagan, because that's the other bit of sort of unaddressed business from the first season, is that Reagan is at once both this really good influence on Mob, like who has all sorts of really good advice and is charismatic and like a genuine kind of father figure, like older brother mentor for him. But he's also a scumbag. He's also like a lie and a cheat and a fraud. And, he's using Mob, and at least at first, Mob doesn't really know it. So, we finally get to see Reagan on his own and sort of how empty kind of his own life ends up being without Mob, and how his his schemes are eventually revealed and sort of brought to light, and he gets a lot of trouble, kind of forcing Mob to come to his rescue. And he does, and Mob kind of, uses his powers to make it seem like Reagan's this big, powerful, like, telepath after all. But then I think my favorite moment in the whole show is that really sweet interaction when they finally kind of make up, when Reagan is going to confront him about, like, well, shit, like, Mob has to know now that, like, I'm not who I say I am, and, like, if he had to come bail me out of this situation, then, like, the game's sort of up. He's gonna think I'm a piece of shit and I'll deserve it. But Mob, I mean, like, you can tell, like, he never says it outright, but you can just tell from his demeanor and his actions, the way that these change, that, like, Mob has a better understanding of what their relationship is like, but he doesn't hold it against Reagan because of all of the, like, genuinely good advice and wisdom that he's given him during their time together. And that even though, like, Reagan has his faults, Mob even says that I think my master, I know what he is, and that is a genuinely good guy despite everything. And it's really touching and it's really sweet. And I love it, and it's great.
It's all great. This show's wonderful. Like, it's constant sweetness, and you feel for everybody and you love them all.
And so I especially like, and it's nice too, because, like, if we're talking about seeing Mob grow as a person, we get another little arc of, like, he's gonna win the big marathon. Like, he's been working with the Body Improvement Club, and they even say, like, hey, Mob, like, you're still kind of trailing behind us, but keep it up, buddy. Like, you're doing a lot better, and he does a lot better in the race than last year, even though he ends up, like, passing out and not being able to finish. And so you get this nice little arc where Reagan sort of trains him, and it's kind of lighter and just some optimism. And I will say that there was a really effective moment, especially because the character development in the show sticks so much, where you get kind of like an oh shit when Ritsu answers the door and the Claw Kid from the last season shows up. He's like, oh, your parents are here. Well, this is going to be complicated. And of course, Mob comes home to find his house in flames and his family seemingly charred to a crisp. And it's really sad, and I was going to be done watching it for the day, but me and Haley were just like, no, fuck, we got to see what happens now. Like, this poor baby, he's been doing so good. Like, I don't want to see Mob, like, break now.
It was fucking rough to watch. Like, that was one, I've been watching this while I was at work, just kind of in the background. And, like, that was where I'm like, oh, man, I can't get all emotional at work about this. That would be really hard to explain. I'm okay. I'm good.
It's a super effective moment, like a real, both in terms of like a, oh shit, like, the parents have been just sort of background characters, but, Ritsu in particular, we spent a lot of time with him, so it's like, oh fuck, like, is he dead? Like, is Mob, like, all alone? Like, this kid's not gonna be able to handle it. Like, so there's the emotional baggage of, like, the deaths, but also the implication of, like, well, we know that, like, if this could set Mob over the edge, and if he went ballistic, that would be very bad.
Yeah.
To say the least. So it's doubly effective, and it even gets Dimple. Dimple, I haven't talked much about Dimple, but I think that he's a pretty good character too.
He's
like, he kind of
way
starts
better
off,
in 2.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that, like, in season 1, he's just kind of one note. Like, you don't even know, like, wasn't even sure why, like, Mob even let him keep hanging around, just because, like, he was just so obviously a dick. But even though he's still a dick, you can see that like his interactions with Mob and Reagan have tempered him a lot and made him a lot better and made him like kind of a genuine friend and ally while still keeping that edge to him maybe that would make him a decent comic relief. So yeah, he grows as a character and it makes his presence a lot more enjoyable.
Just like
in this.
everyone. It's incredible. What a concept.
What a concept. Everyone in the show.
You get a character arc, and you get a character arc. I'm clearly not talking enough here because I'm making Oprah references now, and I'm just trying to fill in my space. I'm sorry. Jackson has been knocking this episode out of the park by himself, and I've had nothing to add.
I am sorry that I have seized the means of production.
Oh no, it's a wonderful episode. Don't misunderstand. I'm just filling in dead air wherever I can, and by that I mean making Oprah references in the year of our Lord 2019.
By somehow making the air even more dead.
Oh, we need a psychic or something.
Hey-oh! Get spirits and such consultation in here. Anyway,
now that Sean's
so-
done, brush him aside.
Yeah, we'll put Sean back in his hole. The grown-ups are talking about anime here. Mob, and this is a really effective turning point. However, this is where we get into my my big gripe with the show, and that is in both season 1 and season 2. About 3/4 of the way through the season, the show drops a lot of like the character drama and a lot of the elements that make it more unique and start focusing on battling with other psychics. And as a consequence, it becomes a lot more like a typical battle shonen, which is strange because obviously I like battle shonen. You know, for all my gripes with, you know, JoJo, I've still read all the way up to part 7. I still like JoJo. And DBZ, obviously I'm a huge fucking fan of DBZ. This is a bold claim considering it's one of the most popular anime on earth, but I would say it's underappreciated and underrated even in some of the stuff that it does with its storytelling. So I love me some battle shonen, but the problem for me is that as someone who is familiar with the battle shonen tropes and sort of the way that this stuff tends to work, to see Mob go from kind of playing with those tropes and using them as like a springboard for a more character-driven story to kind of indulging them more directly, it feels like a bit of a step down, especially when you come like high off the heels of such emotional moments as like Mob breaking down after realizing that he couldn't get through to Teruki and feeling like a failure, or him finally resolving his issues with Reagan and, you know, trying his best to, impress Tsubomi. Like at that point, I'm just invested in Mob's middle school drama. I'm like, get the girl, Mob. Like you'll show them all. Like you're gonna be the best. But then we move into the Claw Gang stuff, and as Sean had said, it very much feels like an Avengers movie, particularly this time, because like whole sections of the city get wiped out, and there are a lot of good action scenes. But as far as the grounding, I think particularly in this season, it's grounded less in character and more in tropes, I feel like. In that, so let's talk about your average Dragon Ball Z arc. How Dragon Ball Z arcs tend to go is this: a big bad shows up, maybe with some minions. Goku is out of commission for one reason or another.
Usually he's dead.
Not always though. So this leaves Gohan, Piccolo, Krillin, Vegeta, like the supporting cast, to kind of do what they can and fend off the minions or just avoid the big bad in the meantime, until Goku shows up and saves the day, basically. And then there's a big epic fight, and, you know, then there's a resolution and the arc is over. And that is a model that other battle shonen have used to varying degrees of success. It's a model that one is obviously very aware of, because One Punch Man isn't so much like a twist on that model as just the model taken to its logical extreme. But Mob's not so much about it because, usually in these psychic adventures, the only other character of note tends to be Reagan, who doesn't have any powers. So Mob just tends to take care of things by himself. And so here we get a situation now where after the mental stress and trauma of thinking his family is dead, and that question's resolved a little quickly, not super quickly.
It is kind of like next episode within the first 15 minutes.
Yeah. So that intrigue is sort of gone. We know Ritsu at least is kicking around, and as a viewer, that's who we really care about. Like, we'd be sad if Mob's parents had died, but they're just sort of bit characters, really. So Mob's out of commission. It's up to Teriki and the rest of the Reform Scars to sort of take on the Claw Gang, who have used all their powers to take over the city. And they use their powers to take over the city, and they get all the minions, but they can't get the big guy. And so it comes down to Mob to take on the big guy. It's a Dragon Ball arc. It's a Dragon Ball arc, 100%. Shaw's compares it to an Avengers movie, also apt due to the that other trope that I always hate, that is like, oh, good thing all the civilians in this city of millions have been evacuated, so we can create a planet out of the buildings and like crush people with them without any sort of guilt or consequence. And then you get some action, some pretty good action, I will say, especially in this season. They've upped the game even more somehow.
As we said, style out the ass.
Style out the ass. And so, yeah, that's my big gripe. Like, this is in my top 5 anime, definitely. But this is the one gripe that I have that doesn't make it like my favorite anime, period. Like just this lull of kind of losing interest, of being like, yeah, the action's cool, but in other episodes we had cool action with some character development. And I mean, especially now, like in this arc particular, the characters talk a lot about the importance of bonds and friendship and not being alone. And now we're getting into straight up fairy tale territory. Not that this is, in terms of writing, is like on that like level or anything. But yeah, so it's a lot more typical. And as a result, not so much because the content itself is like bad necessarily. Just by virtue of it not being super interesting in a show full of things that are super interesting and emotionally resonant, it sticks out like a sore thumb. However, in both cases, how the final battle resolves is super great. Like, these conversations that Mob has with the big evil psychics who are, take that your life is your own, you're the protagonist of your own life story, to the extreme and say that, like, I am the main character of the world, and because I am powerful, might makes right, no one can stand up to me. And so this is, when we get to this fight in particular, my interest shoots way back up. And again, with the scars in the last season, they resolved that in a super interesting way. But here, this feels like the thesis of the whole show, sort of, in that we have this fight in that the big businessman, Sho's father, has a similar gimmick to Mob, in that he does the classic Frieza thing and releases more and more of his power over the fight. I mean, structurally, it's identical to the Boros fight from One Punch Man. Whereas the point of that fight was that, Boros is, sitting here, like, he sees Saitama as his equal, and he's having the time of his life. And, he's maybe giving Saitama a bit of a fight, but in the end, it doesn't even matter. Like, Saitama's still bored. He still isn't feeling any more fulfilled after this fight, and he could have ended it at any time. Here, it's also made abundantly clear that if Mob lets go and, you know, completely gives in, does what Gohan did in DBZ to Cell, basically, that, like, he too could end this at any time, regardless of how impressive the villain's power is. And they do build him up to be a pretty credible threat, I'd say, especially with that, reveal that the experiment to make new psychics didn't really work, but the big bad is just so powerful he can just bestow them with a power for them to put a reasonable amount of, like, effort into their fights and make it work out okay for his army. And I think that works well with the whole, like, your life is your own dichotomy as well, because, you know, as he says, like, yeah, I mean, in the end, it's all about me. I don't really need these minions, but they're useful to have around sometimes. So yeah, and it's made abundantly clear, like, you see Mob go, like, full Saiyan, like, he gets, like, a bloodlusted battle grin, and his hair, like, goes up and his eyes are red, and we even see a moment where, like, we think that he's failed in talking him down, and Mob sort of gives up and is like, well, I can't do it, like, I failed, I've lost this fight, because I have to kill you, and he starts doing this really brutal thing where he twists the bad guy's arms and legs and, like, starts compressing him into, like, a corkscrew, basically. And again, it's clear that he could have just done this at any time if he was dedicated to just removing the problem with force. But the thing about Mob that makes him such a lovely, sweet little boy is that he thinks about this, he thinks about his brother, he thinks about the one time that he hurt his brother, and he's like, no, like, I can't do it, I can't lose control, I can't just be an asshole like him, so I gotta find another way. And then the way that the arc resolves is super great and emotional, and Mob does get through to him a little bit. The bad guy's determined to a lot of parallels to the Cell Saga here. The guy does the thing where he is going to, like, blow himself up in the city and, like, fuck you, I'm taking you with me, and Mob uses his powers. It's still, what's great about this moment where Mob contains the explosion is that this is still a display of power, and that Mob is using, like, a force field that he creates to contain it. Like, he still has to be stronger than him just in order to, you know, lessen the damage, but he's not showing his power in a way that is like a show of force or like a fuck you, I win because I'm the strongest and the best, because that'd be antithetical to the themes and Mob's character. And so you know, that's basically how the season ends. The big bad isn't dead. Mob's words, I mean, it did work in the end. Like, the big bad kind of turns himself in. Like, they have a heart-to-heart thinking about how his, like, sociopathy drove away the people he cared about, and, you know, his how he failed his son and stuff. And it's super great and super sweet and wonderful, and the series ends on a super high note, just like the last season, and it's perfect, and you should watch it. And I feel like I've just explained the whole show in order, so please, retroactively, if you haven't seen the show, watch it before listening to this spoiler cast. Everything I've said, you can just get for yourself and feel those emotions deep in your heart. And, you know, maybe you'll enjoy the action, you know, shown and stuff more than I did, because that's the only hiccup. The rest of it is just rock solid fucking character writing. This is honestly the kind of show, I'll say this is the kind of show that makes me, like, insecure about my abilities as a person, because the show, I started my novel that I'm trying to get published right now, has many similar themes to Mob Psycho 100, and the fact that Mob Psycho 100 exists makes me feel like, well, why should I even try now? This exists in the world and it's much better. But my life is my own. I got my own things to offer. I'm a different person than one. It's a different story. So hopefully someone will pick it up and you'll read it and see what I'm talking about. And just know that I started work out of this fucking thing way before I read Mob Psycho 100, so it's not a ripoff. How dare you suggest that? And anything to add, good sir?
No, I mean, not really. Jackson really kind of knocked this one out of the park, as I said. He covered everything I could hope to cover and more, because, I mean, this is his wheelhouse. Like, that's all it boils down to, man. This is his shit. He knows what he's talking about with this. I want to mention briefly that I thought the fact that a broccoli sprouts from the middle of the fight at the end is kind of a cute little, you know, analogy for expunging their bad emotions because Mob hates broccoli and stuff. I thought that was just kind of a cute little throwback and everything. So
it's cute and also funny, and it makes you remember, like, after all some pretty emotionally heavy shit, like, oh yeah, goofy shit happens in this show too.
yeah, it's great. So that's what I got. I've been Sean McKinda. Find me on Twitter at Sean_McKinda. Find me on Twitch at twitch.tv/Shoppers_Skippy. Find me on 25 Years Later site by searching Sean McKinda on that or just checking around. I do a bunch of like small little things. So on like the weekly What's the Buzz and the 25 Years Later pop culture stuff. Like I usually have an article in there as well, and they're just short little things. Go hunt me down. I'm on there all the time.
And I'm Jackson Keller. You can find me at my friend Connor's Twitch stream at Genghis_Con_, because I play Smash with him. Is there a schedule? Absolutely not. But if you're a night creature or in a different time zone, come play with us.
And if you want to talk to the podcast or, suggest us guests or other episodes or something like that, you can do so at BADH_cast on Twitter. It's also a great way to get in touch with Jackson if you're like, hey, I go to bed at a reasonable time and can't tune into your Smash streams, so here's my idea and here's why Jackson's wrong. You can do that way. I'll let him know what's up.
Yeah, Sean, you know what else is a great way to get in touch with me?
Oh, what's a great way to get in touch with you?
Our very own patron Discord for our $1 tier patrons on the Beating a Dead Horse Patreon.
And where is this Patreon?
You can find it at patreon.com/BADHcast. And then you too can give me money to talk to me.
Capitalism. There's nothing wrong with this system. So yeah, we do have a Patreon in case it's not perfectly clear. You can support us, help us stay ad-free, help us produce more episodes, and listen to our bonus episodes. We have a great episode already up there, and we have some great stuff in the works for bonus episodes, so keep an eye on that. As always, thanks to Loads of Highway for the use of our theme song. It is Suicide Alternate Take off the album High Octane Low Expectations. Go check them out. They're a great band. They're on Spotify, all that good stuff. They're wonderful. Please listen to them, support them. And also, thanks to 25 Years Later Site.com for hosting our stuff. Obviously, I write for them, but there's a bunch of other better, more talented people who also write for them and have a bunch of really good analysis, news updates, anything you could really want. They talk about it. It's great.
Sean, your life is your own. You contribute just as much to anyone else at 25 Years Later and have a valid, unique perspective in your own talents. That's what Mob has taught us, and I'm going to preach the good word of my precious boy, and I name my Espeon and Pokemon Heart Gold after Mob.
I appreciate that, but I'm also trying to talk up 25 Years Later right now, man. Like, you're kind of undermining what I'm doing here.
We're in chill mode. Yes, you degenerate. Go listen to your intellectual betters at 25yearslatersite.com.
So yeah, and next week we'll be talking about Shazam. So it's a movie that we've both, as I said, are really interested in watching, weirdly enough, because, like, Jackson's not normally a superhero guy, and I'm kind of done with superheroes in general, but, like, I'm charmed by it. So, hey, maybe it'll be good.
There's something, just to give like a sneak preview for why I'm interested in Shazam, in addition to like the movie just seeming kind of charming. I'm a sucker for movies that star kids and like kind of innocent sort of ways, and the fact that the premise of Shazam is sort of the appeal of superheroes taken to a logical extreme. I'm totally copying an old Movie Bob video right now, but like the fact that it's just a kid who says a magic word and becomes a big badass adult. I mean, that's it's the power fantasy in its most innocent, wholesome sort of form. So I'm excited to see what they do with it.
And I just really like Zachary Levi, and him just playing a big kid is basically my shit through and through. So that's all I want. Bye.
Don't you go into the ground. Don't you go